Obviously, I'm going to be stumbling over my words a little bit this morning. It's just how it goes. I didn't get to read but a paragraph of this before I started the live stream, but I'm starting the live stream late today. Later than I'd like to be. I got up later than I'd like to, and then after I got out of bed, I got started on everything a little bit later than I like to. And then when I went to do things, it's like everything else. You know, when you're poor, let's just say that's the easiest way to say it. It's like all of the things that you need to do depend on the tools, right? And every time I go to do something, the tools I have are just not in the greatest shape. Like the lawnmower. I think I put bad gas in it yesterday because I didn't think to check the gas before I put it in. It had been sitting out there in the weather, and sometimes it had gone rained on, and sometimes it was under the bus. So, you know, it's not surprising it didn't start, and I've had to pull apart parts of the engine and then, you know, get some fresh gas and get the old gas out of it and all that sort of stuff. So it's definitely been a little bit of a fiasco this morning. But that's how it is sort of all the time. I'm a little bit behind, it seems like, all the time. No biggie. Just the way it is. Anyways, today we're going to be talking about Grandpa George. Hello, number one. You're the first person here. Grandpa George Frederick Kuntz. That's who we're going to be talking about. The Curious Lore of Precious Gemstones. This is part 3 of me reading his book. It's not a full reading. There are some stuff that I stumble over, names, and then there are some things that I skip over, lists of names. I didn't want to read every single one of them. And you know what? I probably should have, because if there's anybody that's hearing impaired or visually impaired and watches this, then that information would be important to them. So I didn't take that into consideration, but I am taking that into consideration now. And I lost the one person that was here. I wonder if the stream's not running very good or something. I can open my phone and look. Regardless, we're going to record a good video today. We're going to go over sapphires, and then we're going to go at least part of the way, if not the full way through the chapter on crystal balls. I think the next chapter is on crystal balls. Scrying crystal balls. I'm just going to go and look at my channel real quick and make sure the whole thing is live and running properly. Oh yeah, I'm looking down at my phone right now. So everything's live and running properly. It's the thing about live streams. Sometimes it takes a while for people to get in there, and then sometimes your people don't see the notifications. And right now, this is a time where most people are at work. So that's why morning shows tend to be between like 5 a.m. and 9 a.m. And I'm getting started late. Felix, stop clawing the couch. And I'm starting late at, you know, my time, it's 8:35. So it's like, for a typical morning style show, there's like 3 hours late. I should be up and started at like 5 a.m. consistently. But being that I don't even have a dishwasher and my dryer always seems to be down, so I need to go dry my laundry at the laundromat, and I use a bike in order to take and do all that stuff, my time is tied up a lot on very menial tasks. Anyways, we keep having people pop in and then pop out. No big deal. We're going to get started so that this thing is a good video to watch later. When I was reading, I stumbled a lot yesterday. Wasn't really happy about that, but you know, it happens when you're doing things live, especially when it's the things that you're not really very practiced at. And I'm not very practiced at, you know, reading other people's work live. I'm not very practiced at that at all. So today, we're going to be doing the Curious Lore of Precious Stones, and we're going to be running into sapphires. Oh, you're so cute, kitty. And sapphires are awesome, and I've dug some sapphires, and we have some sapphires here from Montana. I'll put those on the screen in just a second. Sapphire. The sapphire is noted as a regal gem by Demigron. I got to make sure I have the right screen up. who asserts that kings wore it about their neck as a powerful defense from harm. The stone preserved the wearer from envy and attracted divine favor. For royal use, sapphires were set in bracelets and necklaces, and the sacred character of the stone was attested by the tradition that the law given to Moses on the Mount was engraved on tablets of sapphire. While we should probably translate here lapis lazuli instead of sapphire, all such passages were later understood as referring to the true sapphire, which is not found in pieces of the requisite size. In the 12th century, the Bishop of Rennes lavished encomiums upon the beautiful stone. It is quite natural that this writer should lay a special stress upon the use of the sapphire for adorning of rings. For it was in the time that it was beginning to be regarded as the stone most appropriate for ecclesiastical rings. The sapphire was like pure sky, and mighty nature had endowed it with so great a power that it might be called sacred and the gem of gems. Fraud was banished from its presence, and necromancers honored it more than any other stone, for it enabled them to hear and to understand the obscurest oracles. The traditional virtue of the sapphire as an antidote against poison is noted by Bartholomeus Angelicus, who claims to have seen as test of its power, somewhat similar to the recorded by Ahmed Tafashi of the Emerald. John of Tavisha's version of this passage reads as follows: His virtue is contrary to venom, and quencheth it every deal. And why if you put an antidote in a box, and hold a very sapphire of India in the mouth of the box, only while by virtue thereof the antidote is overcome, and dieth as it were solemn, as Dias saith pseudo discordize, and in the same I have essayed oft in many and diverse places. His virtue keepeth and saith in sight, and cleareth even of fieth, without ony grief, voicing the natural belief that the sapphire was endowed with power to influence spirits. Bartholomeus says that the stone was a great favorite of those who practiced necromancy, and he adds, although witches love well this stone, for they were, and they may work certain wonders by virtue of this stone. Going to continue in just one second. Some sapphires I got from Montana. There was in the south of Kingston Museum in London a splendid sapphire of a particular tint. In the daylight, it showed a beautiful, rich blue color, while by artificial light, it has a violet hue and resembles an amethyst. In the 18th century, this stone was in the collection of Count de Walicki, a Polish museum, and M.M.E. Ginalis used it as the theme for one of her stories, entitling Les Sapphires Merveilleux. Here, the sapphire is used as a test of female virtue, the change of color indicating unfaithfulness on the part of the wearer. If the owner of the stone wished to prove that the subject of the test was innocent, she was made to wear the sapphire for 3 hours of daylight. But in the opposite case, the test was so timed that it began in daylight and ended when candles or lamps had been lighted. This sapphire, still known as a sapphire merveilleux, I'm not sure, was for a time in the collection of the Duke of Orleans, who bore the name of Philip Ingalte during the French Revolution. The star sapphire is that variety of a sapphire which, when the stone is cut and rounded off horizontal with the dome of the crystal, the light is condensed across the 3 lines of the crystalline interference. 3 cross lines produce a star, which moves as the source of the light. Or as it is moved from the source of the light, star sapphires very rarely possess the deep blue color of the fine blue sapphire. Generally, the blue is somewhat impure, or of a milky blue, or else a gray blue, or something else, almost a pure white. The blue-gray, gray and white stones frequently show a much more distinct star, possibly from the fact that there are more inclusions between the layers of the crystals than with the darker blue stones. As it is, the set of interference bands that produce the particular light, just as the eye agate was used in some countries to preserve against the evil eye, so the moving star is believed by the Sinhalese to serve as a protection and a guard against witchcraft of all kinds. The great Oriental traveler, Sir Richard Francis Burton, had a large star sapphire, or asteria as it was called. He referred to it as his talisman, for it always brought him good horses and prompt attention whenever he went. In fact, it was only in those places where he received proper attention that he would show it to the natives, a favor they greatly appreciated because the sight of the stone was believed to bring good luck. The fame of Burton's asteria traveled ahead of him, and it served him well as a guiding star. De Boot, writing in the 17th century, states that such a stone was called Siegstein, victory stone among the Germans. The remarkable asteria known as the Star of India in the Morgan Tiffany collection in the American Museum of Natural History has a more or less indefinite historic record of some 3 centuries, but after its many wanderings, it is now found a worthy resting place in the great museum. It weighs in at 543 carats. The asteria, or star sapphire, might be called a stone of destiny, as the 3 crossbars which traverse it are believed to represent faith, hope, and destiny. As the stone is moved, or the light changes, a living star appears. As a guiding gem, warding off ill omen and the evil eye, the star sapphire is worn for the same reason as were the oculus mundi and the oculus belli, one of the most unique of talismanic stones. It is said to be so potent that it continues to exercise its good influence over the first wearer, even when it has passed into the other hands. You guys should see this guy over here. He's just being a kitty love hound. Sard. I've never heard of this stone. The sard was regarded as a protection against incantation and sorcery, and was believed to sharpen the wits of the wearer, rendering him fearless, victorious, and happy. The red hue of this stone was supposed to neutralize and malign influence of the dark onyx, driving away the bad dreams caused by the later and dispelling the melancholy thoughts it inspired. Serpentine. The Italian peasants today believe the pebbles of green serpentine afford protection from the bites of venomous creatures. These stones are usually green with streaks or veins of white, and the name was derived from their fancy's resemblance to a serpent's skin. In addition to their prophylactic powers, if any of these had been bitten by such a creature, the stone, when applied to the wound, is supposed to draw out the poison. Here, as in the case of coral, the hand of man must not have shaped the amulet. It should be in its natural state. As a general rule, however, the belief that the touch of any iron instrument, such as the tool of a gem cutter, destroys the magic efficacy of the substance, is less firmly held in regards to stones than in reference to coral. Topaz, sea chrysolite. Turquoise. While there was a tendency to attribute the virtues originally ascribed to one particular stone, the others of the same or similar color and appearance, certain stones were regarded as possessing special virtues not commonly attributed to others. A notable instance of this is the quality supposed to inhere in the turquoise. This stone was known in Egypt from a very early period and is later described by Pliny under the name of Callias. For Pliny and for all those who derived their information from him or from the sources he used, the turquoise only participated in the virtues aligned to all blue or greenish-blue stones. But from the 13th century, when the name turquoise was first employed, we read that the stone possessed the power to protect the wearer from injury by falling, more especially from horseback. Later, this was extended to cover falls from a building or over a precipice. The 14th century authority, the Lapidary of Sir Madeville, states that the turquoise protected horses from ill effects resulted from drinking cold water when overheated by exertion, and it is said that the Turks often attach these stones to the bridles and frontlets of their horses as amulets. They are also so used in Samarkand and Persia. We might therefore be justified in supposing that the turquoise was originally used in the East as a horse amulet, and the belief in its power to protect from falls may have arisen from the idea that it rendered horses more sure-footed and enduring. As the horse was often regarded as a symbol of the sun in its rapid course through the blue heavens, the celestial hue of the turquoise may have caused it to be associated in the same way with the horse. We can only hazard this as a plausible conjecture. Probably the earliest notice of this particular superstition is regarded to the turquoise, namely, that it preserves the wearer from injury in case of falling, is contained in Volomier's 13th century Steinbach, where he read, "Whomever owns the true turquoise set in gold will not injure any of his limbs when he falls, whether he be riding or walking, so long as he has the stone with him." For sale, with the rest of the owner's property, everyone was amazed to find it had entirely lost its color. Where did we skip here? The wearer. Annales de Boot, court physician of Emperor Rudolph II, tells a story of turquoise that after being 13 years in the possession of a Spaniard, was offered for sale with the rest of his owner's property. Everyone was amazed to find that it had entirely lost its color. Nevertheless, de Boot's father bought it from him for a trifling sum. On his return home, however, ashamed to wear so mean-looking a gem, he gave it to his son, saying, "Son, as the virtues of turquoise are said to only exist when the stone has been given, I will try its efficacy on bestowing it upon thee." Little appreciating the gift, the recipient had his arms engraved on it as though he had been only a common agate, and wore it as a signet. He had scarcely worn it a month, however, before it resumed its pristine beauty and daily seemed to increase in splendor. Could we accept this statement as true, we would have here an altogether unique instance of a recovery by a turquoise of blue color it had lost. Not long after, start to realize my voice starts getting raspy. Not long after, the powers of de Boot turquoise were put to the test. As he was returning to Bohemia from Padoue, where he had just taken his degree, he was forced to traverse a narrow and dangerous road at night. Suddenly his horse stumbled and threw him heavily to the ground. But strange to say, neither horse nor rider was injured by the fall. Next morning, while washing his hands, de Boot remarked that a quarter of his turquoise had broken away. Nevertheless, the stone did not appear to lose its virtue. Some time afterward, when the wearer was lifting a very heavy pole, he felt all at once a sharp pain in his side and heard his ribs crack. So that he feared he had injured himself seriously, However, it turned out that he had not broken any bones, but had simply strained himself. But on looking at the turquoise, he saw that it had again broken into two pieces. A singular virtue ascribed to the turquoise was that if striking the hour correctly, if the stone were suspended from a thread between the thumb and index finger in such a way that a slight vibration would make the stone strike against the side of a glass, De Boot states that he made the experiment successfully. But he very sensibly explains that the apparent wonder by the unconscious effect of the mind on the body, the expectation that the stone was going to strike a certain number of times, induced an involuntary movement of the hand. The turquoise seems to have been almost exclusively by men. The turquoise seems to have been worn almost exclusively by men. At the beginning of the 17th century, for De Boot, writing in 1609, said that it was so highly regarded by men that no man considered his hand to be well adorned unless he wore a fine turquoise. Women, however, rarely wore this gem. This custom was such in vogue among the Englishmen who traveled in the Orient until a score of years ago. The Persians fully appreciated the beauty and power of their natural stone, and they have a saying that to escape evil and attain good, one must see the reflection of the new moon either on the face of a friend or a copy of the Quran, or on a turquoise. Thus, ranking this stone with two most precious things, a friend and a source, and a warrant of religion, possibly we should take this proverbial saying to indicate that whoever has a true friend, a copy of the sacred volume, or a turquoise will be preserved from harm. The turquoise of the Los Cerritos mines in New Mexico is rudely extracted by building large fires at the base of the rock until it becomes heated. When cold water is dashed over it, the sharp change of temperature splitting up the rock. Some of the fragmentary material thus secured is worked up in the region into heart-shaped ornaments or amulets, locally called malachites. And the religious veneration by which many of the New Mexico Indians still regard that turquoise was noted by Major Hyde when he explored the region in 1880. For some Pueblo Indians of the San Domingo and New Mexico expressed strong disapproval of his actions in extracting turquoise from the old mine, as they looked upon this as the sacred stone which should not pass into the possession of those whose savior was not Montezuma. The ruins, called Los Muertos, situated 9 miles from Tempe, Arizona, had furnished a peculiarly interesting amulet or fetish of Zuni workmanship. This is a seashell which has been coated with black pitch, in which an encrusted turquoise and garnets so disposed in mosaic as to represent clearly enough the figure of a toad, the sacred emblem of the Zunis. The sacred character with which this stone was invested is shown by the wealth of turquoise ornaments found in some of the burials, notably in those of the Pueblo Bonito, unearthed by George H. Pepper in 1896. This is one of the Chaco Canyon groups of the ruins in the northwestern part of New Mexico. In one case, nearly 9,000 beads and pendants of turquoise were found on about a single skeleton. There was abundant evidence in the special care bestowed. Come on now, I got this. There was abundant evidence in the special care bestowed upon the burial that the deceased must have been a man of high rank, and the condition of the skull plainly indicated that he had met a violent death. In 1980, beads found on the breast of the skeleton are believed to have been strung as a necklace, and the positions of other masses of these beads renders it probable that they had been used for bracelets or anklets, the strings having decayed and disappeared in the course of time. The most interesting of the turquoise objects are, however, the pendants, worked into various forms, designed to favor the entrance of some guardian spirit into the stone. In this single burial were found pendants shaped more or less roughly into the forms of a rabbit, a bird, an insect, a human foot, and a shoe. Around another burial in the same chamber were strewn nearly 6,000 turquoise beads and pendants. In all, 24,932 beads were found in these burials. Another very interesting object from the Pueblo Bonito, and one having probably a special ceremonial use and value, is a turquoise basket, that is to say, a cylindrical basket 3 inches in diameter and 6 inches long, originally made of splendor splints with a coating of gum in which 1,214 pieces of turquoise have been set. These are very closely set and form a complete mosaic covering for the object. The legend of the Navajos contain allusions to allusions to turquoise jeweled baskets, and Mr. Pepper raises the question whether or no this can refer to those made by the Pueblo Indians. The Apache name for the turquoise is Duluki. I'm not sure. I think there is a J sound on the end of that, but those Native Americans, when I watch a lot of Native American videos, and you want to talk about some hard enunciations when they're speaking their own language, like it is a lot of breathing and breath sounds, like signifies either a green or blue stone, no distinction being made between the two colors. This stone is highly prized for its talismanic virtue. Indeed, the possession of a turquoise was indispensable for a medicine man, as without it he would not receive proper recognition. That some of the powers of the thunderstone were ascribed to the turquoise by the tribes appear from the fancy that a man who could go to the end of the rainbow after a storm and search in the damp earth would find a turquoise. One of its supposed powers was to aid the warrior or hunter by assuring the accuracy of his aim. For if a turquoise was affixed to a gun or a bow, the shot sped from that weapon and would go straight to the mark. A lady prominent in the London world is said to possess powers of restoration. I'm sorry, I keep reading it wrong. A lady prominent in the London world is said to possess the power of restoring to their pristine hue turquoise that have grown pale. According to report, this lady is often called upon to use her particular gift by friends whose turquoises have faded. While the improvement, supposed to be noted, may be more imaginary than real in many cases, there is little doubt that this stone is exceptionally sensitive to the action of certain emanations, and may at times be influenced by the wearer's general state of health. The writer believes that a turquoise, like an egg, can never be restored to its original state. All right, it's moving on, but let's actually talk about that a little bit real quick. So, let's say that the lady that's restoring people's stones is actually a lapidary. And let's say this is the kind of turquoise that's not really, really hard, and maybe it's been oxidizing, and maybe the outside layer of it will lose its color that's exposed to the oxygen. I think this is possible with turquoise. I'm pretty sure there's some people that watch my channel that can leave some really good comments in there. But if it does oxidize over time, or from the oils on people's hands handling it and stuff like that, and the color starts to seep away, if you give it to somebody that has that understanding and a little bit of jewelry knowledge, and they can pull the turquoise out, or they can polish it in place, grind it and repolish it in place, that would very much be restoring it, especially if at this point in time, 1800s, somebody's bringing it to somebody and they're like, okay, I'll take it and I'll work my magic, come back in 3 weeks. And then the person comes back in 3 weeks and it looks like a brand new shiny stone. It might be magic to one person and it might be craft to another. On the use of engraved and carved gems as talismans. I thought this was going to go into crystal balls. I was wrong. I do that a lot. The virtues believed to be inherent in precious stones was thought to gain an added potency when the stone was engraved with a symbol or figure possessing a special sacredness, or denoting the typifying a special quality. The presupposedness, a considerable development of civilization, since the art of engraving on precious stones offers many mechanical difficulties, and thus requires a high degree of artistic and mechanical skill. But it is true that the earliest engraved stones, the Babylonian cylinders and the Egyptian scarabs, were both designed to serve an eminently practical purpose as well, namely that of seals. But in a great number of instances, these primitive seals were looked upon as endowed with talismanic power, and wore on the person as talismans. The scarabs, so highly favored by the Egyptians as an ornamental form, is a representation of the Scarabus sacer, the typical genus of the family Scaraboid. They are usually black, but occasionally show a fine play of metallic colors. After gathering up a clump of dung for the reception of the eggs, the insect rolls it along using the hind legs to propel it, until the material, at first soft and irregular form, becomes hardened and almost perfectly round. A curious symbolism induced the Egyptians to find this beetle an emblem of the world of fatherhood and of man. The round ball, whereas the eggs were deposited, typified the world, and the Egyptians thought the Scarabi were all males. They especially signified the male principle in generation, becoming the types of fatherhood in man. At the same time as only fully grown beetles were observed, it was believed these creatures represented a regeneration or reincarnation. Since it was not realized that the eggs or larval pupal stages had anything to do with the generation of the beetle, thus the scarab was used as a symbol of immortality. While, however, this was the popular view, it seemed unlikely that such close observers as were more cultured Egyptians should have been entirely unfamiliar with this real genus, that the Scarabus sacer, but in this case also, there would have been no difficulty in finding it emblematic of immortality in the various stages through which it passed. The larval stage might well signify the mortal life, the pupal stage the intermediate period represented by the mummy, with which the soul was conceived to be vaguely connected, in spite of its wanderings, through the netherworld, and lastly, and fully developed beetle could be regarded as a type of rebirth into the everlasting life, when the purified and perfected soul again animated the original and transfigured form in a mysterious resurrection. Scarabs are frequently engraved with hieroglyph, Ankh life, and Ha increase of power. The emblem of stability, Tet, is also employed, as well as many others. In addition to these simple symbols, many scarabs bear legends supposed to render them exceptionally luck-bringing. The following are characteristic specimens: Mat Akneb, Lord of the Truth and Life; abounding in grace, very deeply cut as a seal; may they be established, mayest thou have a son; within ornamental border, good stability; Inek Neb Nephir, all good things; inlaid, a good day, a holiday. And if you're just listening and you can't see anything, there are symbols that I was just reading, and I just read them as a list, and then there's symbols next to them that, like, one of them looks like one of the abounding in grace, a very deeply cut as a seal. There is what looks like a lizard and almost like a guitar, 3 in a row shapes, but trying to explain all of them, I probably should have done that a little bit better. I'm new at this kind of content. A mother is a truly good thing, or truth is a good mother. That must be with the one above read. I thought it was the next paragraph. The scarab, for the Egyptians, a type of this raising sun and hence the renewal of life. The scarab, for the Egyptians, a type of the raising sun and hence the renewal of life after death, was copied by the Phoenicians for the Egyptian types and modified in various ways to suit the religious fancies of the various lands to which they bore the products of their art. Much of the original significance of this symbol must have been lost. Probably in many cases, little was left but a vague idea that an amulet of this form would bring good luck to the wearer and guard him from harm. Funeral scarabs were often made of jasper, amethyst, lapis lazuli, ruby, or carnelian, and the names of the gods, kings, priests, officials, or private persons engraved on the base. Occasionally monogrammed or floral devices were engraved. Sometimes the base of the scarab was heart-shaped, and at others the scarab was combined with the utat, or eye of horn, and also with the frog, typifying revivication. Set in rings, there were places on the fingers of the dead. They were placed on the fingers of the dead, or else wrapped in linen bandages. They rested on the heart of the deceased, a type of the sun which rose each day to renew life. They were symbols of resurrection of the body. Some of the Egyptian scarabs were evidently used as talismanic gifts from one friend to another. 2 such scarabs are in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. One bears the inscription, "May Ra grant you a happy new year." The text of the other reading as follows: "May your name be established, may you have a son, and may your house flourish every day." It is a curious fact that the modern greeting of Happy New Year was current in Egypt probably 3,000 years ago. On the Egyptian inscribed scarabs used as signets were engraved many of the symbols. Oh God, there must be something wrong. Oh, nope. I'm not answering that. That's not somebody I know. You know what? As a matter of fact, why do I even have that ringer to where you guys can hear it? That's not very respectful, is it? I ain't got no respect for my own content. Look at that. I didn't say that. That's not true. On the Egyptian inscribed scarabs used as a signet were engraved many of the symbols to which a talismanic virtue was attributed. The urus, serpent, signifying death, is sometimes associated with a knot, the so-called akh symbol, denoting life. Often the hieroglyph for nub, gold, appears. This symbol is a necklace with pendant beads showing the gold beads must have been known in Egypt in the early days when the hieroglyph for gold was first used. All these symbolic features, of which a great number occurred, served to impart to the signet a sacred and auspicious quality which communicated itself to the wearer and even to the impression made by the seal. This in its turn acquired a certain magic force. Few of us would be willing to confess to a belief in the innate power of any symbol. But the suggestive power of a symbol is as real today as it ever was. Any object that invokes a high enough thought or serves to emphasize a profound conviction really possesses a kind of magical quality, since it is capable of causing an effect out of all proportion to its intrinsic worth or its material quality. Many scarabs and signets exist made of the artificial cyanus, which was an imitation lapis lazuli made in Egypt. This was an alkali silicate colored a deep blue with carbonate of copper. Often a wonderful translucent or opaque blue glass was used. The genuine lapis lazuli was also used to a considerable extent for scarabs and cylinders in Egypt and Assyria, and gems were also cut from it in Imperial Roman times. A notable instance of use of lapis lazuli in ancient Egypt was as the material for the image of truth, which the Egyptian Chief Justice wore on his neck, suspended from a golden chain. In Roman times, some of the legionaries are said to have worn rings set with scarabs for the reason that this figure was believed to impart great courage and vigor to the wearer. The Egyptian amulet of the earliest period, up to 12th dynasty circa 2000 BC, differing considerably from those and worn after the beginning of 1580 BC dynasty, those of the earliest period are not numerous and present but a small number of types, animal forms, or heads of animals constituting the most favored models. The precious stone material are principally carnelian, beryl, and amethyst. After the close of the so-called Hyksos period, the age during which foreign kings ruled over Egypt, came the brilliant revival and development of Egyptian civilization that characterized the XVIII dynasty. I think that's like Super Bowl 18. Some of the old forms were entirely cast aside, while others were greatly modified in form and significance. The animal forms losing much of their fantastic quality and coming to be more and more regarded as images of the multifarious divinities worshipped in this later period. In many cases, the animal type was entirely or partially discarded, and the amulets figured the conventional types given to the various divinities. However, some of these images were wholly human. Many of them show a human body with an animal head. Various symbolic designs were also favored. One believed to signify the blood of Isis having the form of a knot or a tie. A frog fashioned out of lapis lazuli and having eyes of gold is one of these amulets of the 18th dynasty or later. An interesting Egyptian talisman in the Louvre, there's just an R on it, right? That is the Louvre, is engraved with a design representing Thom's second seizing a lion by the tail and raising the animal aloft. I hope they don't say his name again. At the same time, he brandished in another hand a club, with which he is about to dash out the lion's brains. The Egyptian word que, strength, is engraved beneath the design, and it indicates that the virtue of the talisman was to increase the strength and courage of the wearer. The inscription being a kind of perpetual invocation to the higher powers whose aid was sought. The children of Israel, when in the desert, were said to have engraved figures on carnelian, just as seals are engraved. This statement, repeated by many early writers, may perhaps have arisen to an identification of carnelian with the first stone of the breastplate. The odium, unquestionably a red stone, and very possibly carnelian, there can be no doubt that this was one of the first stones used for ornamental purposes and for engraving, as a number of specimens have been preserved from early Egyptian times. Because of the cooling and calming effect exercised by carnelian upon the blood, if worn on the neck or on the finger, it is believed to still all angry passions. A class of amulets even older than Egyptian scarabs is represented by engraved Assyrio-Babylonic cylinders. There's been much discussion among the scholars as to the original purpose for which these cylinders were made, some holding that they were exclusively employed as seals or signets, while others inclined to the belief that many of them were intended only for use as amulets or talismans. These cylinders are perforated and were worn suspended from the neck or wrist, as is most frequently the case with talismans, and the engraved designs often represent religious or mythological subjects. The accompanying inscription merely consisting of the names of the gods. Cylinders of this type could not have been used as personal signets, and it is quite possible that Dr. Wiedemann is right in supposing that their imprint on the document was considered to impart a certain mystic sanction to the agreement and render the divinities or spirits accountable for the fulfillment of the contract. The oldest known form of seal is the cylinder. Babylonian and Assyrian cylinder seals are known of a date as early as 4000 BC, from the earliest period until 2500 BC, when they were made of black or green serpentine, conglomerate, diorite, and frequently of the central core of a large conch shell from the Persian Gulf. From 1200 BC to 500 BC, the cylinder form was prevalent, and the materials included a brick red ferruginous quartz, red hematite, and iron ore, and chalcedony, a beautiful variety of the last named stone known as sapphire. Being sometimes used. On cylinders, produced from 4000 BC to 2500 BC, the designs most frequently represented animal forms. On those dating from 2500 BC to 500 BC characters up to the last named date, the work was all done by the sapphire point and not by the wheel. And it is not until the 5th century BC that the wheelwork is apparently in any Babylonian or Assyrian stone engraving. In the course of the 6th century BC, the cylindrical seals became less frequent and tall cone-like seals came into use. A new type makes its appearance about the 5th or 6th century BC, namely the Scaraboid Seal. Introduced into the 3rd century AD, the seals became lower and flatter and the perforation larger until they sometimes assumed the form of rings. Later, the ring form became general. They are usually hollow a little in the middle, which gives them the shape and size of a lower short joints of a reed. Indeed, it has been suggested that the original seal was rudely patterned after a reed joint. The materials used for these cylinders include lapis lazuli, very freely used and probably from the Persian mines, jasper rock crystals, chalcedony, carnelian, agate, jade, etc. A hard black variety of serpentine is perhaps the most common of all materials used for this purpose. A good example of these talismanic symbol. Okay, starting again. A good example of these talismanic cylinders shows the figure of the god Neo. Seated on a stone, holding a ring in his left hand, before him are 2 altars, over which appear respectively a star and a crescent moon. In the front of the god is the figure of a man in an attitude of adoration. Borsippa, where the cylinder was found, was the special seat of worship of Nebo, whose name appears in those of the kings. Nebuchadnezzar, Nebapalzer, and Nebanade. Regarded as the inventor of writing and as the god of learning, Nebo was the lord of the planet Mercury, and this shows a close connection between Babylonian and Greco-Roman ideas in the reference to the god associated with that planet. Nebo was also believed to be the orderer of times and seasons, and this character is indicated by the star and the crescent. The Cretan peasants of today set a high value upon the certain very ancient seals, dating perhaps from as early as 2500 BC, which they find buried in the soil. These seals are inscribed with symbols supposed to represent the prehistoric Cretan forms of writing. Cretan. Of course, these inspirations, which have not yet been deciphered by archaeologists, are utterly incomprehensible for the peasants, but they undoubtedly serve to render the stone objects of mystery. The peasants call them galaberte or milk stones, and they are supposed to promote the secretion of milk, as was the case with the galacite. The careful preservation of these so-called galaperte by Cretan women has served the purpose of archaeological research, as otherwise so large a supply of these various interesting steels would not. Gosh, man, let me do that again. The careful preservation of these so-called galaptre by Cretan women has served the purpose of archaeological research, as otherwise so large a supply of these very interesting seals would not now be available. Many engraved stones of the Roman imperial period bore the figure of Serapis of the Isle, the former signifying time and the later earth. On other stones, the symbol of the zodiacal signs appear, referring to the natal constellation of the wearer. The astrologers, who derived their lore from the Orient, were consulted by all classes of Roman people, and it is therefore very natural that the signet, or the ring wore as an amulet, should frequently have engraved with astrological symbols. Astrological symbols. These designs were usually engraved on onyxes, carnelians, and similar stones in Greek and Roman times, but occasionally the emerald was used in this way, and more rarely the ruby or the sapphire. Here, the cost lines of the material was probably thought to enhance the value of the amulet. The emerald ring of Polycrates, it's one of those three, must have possessed some of the other purely artistic value in his eye, when it could be regarded by him as the most precious of his possessions. In Roman times, the image of Alexander the Great was looked upon as possessing magic virtues, and it is related that when Cornelius Macer gave a splendid banquet in the Temple of Hercules, the chief ornament of the table was an amber cup, in the midst of which was a portrait of Alexander, and around this his whole history figured in small, finely engraved representations. From this cup Macer drank to his health of the Pontifex, and then ordered that it should be passed among the guests, so that each one might gaze upon the image of the great man. Polio related this, states that it was of a common belief that everything happened fortunately for those who bore with them Alexander's portrait executed in gold or silver. Indeed, even among Christian coins of Alexander were in great favor as amulets, and the stern John Chrysostom sharply rebukes those who wore bronze coins of this monarch attached to their hands and their feet. Nowhere in the world was the use of amulets so common as in Alexandria, especially in the first centuries of our era, and the types produced here were scattered far and wide through the Roman world. Amulets made from various colored stones had been used for religious purposes in Egypt from the very earliest period of its history, so that the custom was so deeply rooted in that land. When therefore Alexandria was founded in the 4th century BC and became a great commercial center, attracting men of all races and all religions, it is not surprising that the population eagerly adopted the various amulets used by the adherents of the different religions. The result was a combining and confusion of many different types. With the rapid rise and growth of the Christian religion, a new element was introduced. Unquestionably, the leading Christian teachers were strongly opposed to such superstitious practices, but the rank and file of the faith clung to their old fancies. In the second century, the Gnostic heresy gave a new impulse to the fabrication of amulets. This strange ecclesiasticism, resulting from interweaving of the pagan and Christian ideas, with its complicated symbolism, much of which is almost incomprehensible, found expression in the creation of the most bizarre types of amulets, and the magic virtue of the curious designs was enhanced by the inscription purposely obscured. No. The magic of the curious designs was enhanced inscriptions purposely obscure. The incomprehensible always seems to have a mysterious charm for those devoted to the magic arts, and the adepts willingly catered to this taste, so that we can often only guess at the significance of the words and the names engraved upon the Gnostic or Babylonic gems. So widespread was the use throughout the Roman Empire that there was factories entirely devoted to the production of these objects. Regarding the sacred name Abrasax, which was inscribed in so many Gnostic gems, we read in St. Augustine's treatise, De Haeris, Balasides assert that there were 365 heavens. It was for this reason that he regarded the name Abrasax as sacred and venerable. According to the Greek notations, the letters comprising this name given that number. So they have A equals 1, what looks like a B equals 2, what looks like a P equals 100, A equals 1. Symbol I don't understand, sort of looks like a 6. It equals 200. A equals 1. E equals 60, all equaling 365. It is, however, not unlikely that the 365 days in the solar year are signified, and that this enigmatical name might thus be brought into connection with Mithra, the solar divinity who was worshipped throughout the Persian and Roman empires in the 1st and 2nd centuries of our era. A very recondite but ingenious explanation of the Gnostic names Abersacs is given by Haradin in his notes to Pliny, Pliny's Natural History. He sees in the first 3 letters the initials of 3 Hebrew words signifying Father, Son, and Spirit: Ab, Ben, and Ruah. The triune God, the last 4 letters, are the initials of the Greek words. I can't pronounce it, but it says, He saves men by the sacred wood, the cross. This seems rather far-fetched. It must be confessed, and yet to anyone familiar with the vagaries of Alexandrine ecclesiasticism and with the tendencies of the time and place to make the strange and uncouth combinations of Greek and Hebrew forms, there is nothing inherently improbable in the explanation. Indeed, the Hebrew and Greek words in this composite sentence might have been regarded as typifying the union of the Old and New Testaments, and such an acrostic would certainly have been looked upon as possessing a mystic and supernatural power. Many explanations have been offered as the origin and significance of the charismatic figure of the Abersacs god engraved on a number of Gnostic amulets. There seems to be no doubt that this figure was invented by Balasades, chief of the Gnostic sect, bearing his name and who flourished in the early part of the 2nd century AD. While the details of the type as perfected were undoubtedly borrowed from the ecclesiastic symbolism of the Egyptian and Western Asiatic world, it is almost impossible to conjecture the reasons determining the selection for this particular form. A jasper engraved with the famous Gnostic symbol was set in the ring by Siegfried, Bishop of Chichester, in 1159 AD. This ring was found on the skeleton of the bishop and is now preserved in the treasury of the Cathedral of Chichester. Undoubtedly, the curious symbolic feature was given a perfectly orthodox meaning, and indeed, it was not really a pagan symbol, as the Gnostics were indifferent Christians. Although their system was a fanciful elaboration of the doctrines of the late Alexandrian school of Greek philosophy, and the adaptation of this to the teaching of Christian tradition, in many cases, however, gems with purely pagan designs were worn by Christians. Designs such as Isis with the child Horus, which was taken to be the Virgin Mary with the infant Jesus. A curious amulet, apparently belonging to the Gnostic variety, and intended to bring success to the owner of a racehorse, is now in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. The material is green jasper with red spots. On the obverse, the horse is figured with the victor's palm and the name Tiberius. On the reverse appears the vulture-headed figure of Abaraxas, God, and the characters Zikta Iwa Bapia, which have been translated Io, the destroyer and creator. Possibly this amulet may have been attached to the horse during his races to ensure victory, as we know that amulets of this kind were used in this way. As illustrating the eclectic character of some of the amulets used in the early Christian centuries, we may note one in the cabinet des Males in Paris. This has upon the obverse the head of Alexander the Great. On the reverse is a she-ass with her fowl. And below this is a scorpion and the name Jesus Christ. Another amulet of this class, figured by Vittori, also has the head of Alexander on the obverse, while the reverse bears the Greek monogram of the name Christos. After the 3rd or 4th century of our era, the art of gem engraving seems to have lost, or at least to have been very seldomly practiced, and is noteworthy in the matter that after this period, writers who treat of the virtues of engraved gems as talismans rarely, if ever, use the words, "if you engrave such or such a figure on a stone," but write, "if you find such a figure." The figures engraved on precious stones were supposed to have greater or lesser degree of efficacy in themselves, independent of the virtues peculiar to the stone on which they were engraved, and this efficacy dependent largely upon the hour, day, or month during which the work was executed. For the influence of the planet, star, or constellation which was in the ascent was thought to infuse a subtle essence into the stone while the appropriate image was being engraved. However, to exert the maximum power, the virtue of the image must be of the same character as the virtue inherent in the material, and the gem become less potent when this was not the case. Certain images, those symbolizing the zodiacal signs, for instance, were looked upon as possessing such power that their peculiar nature impressed itself upon the stones, inherently of different quality. Others, again, were only efficacious, I think it's efficacious, when engraved on the stones, the quality of which was in sympathy with them. Naturally, many of the ancient gems, which had been preserved from Greek and Roman times, were recognized as being purely products of art. But in medieval and later times, the idea of the magic quality of all engraved gems had become so deeply rooted that in many cases a magical character was ascribed to them, entirely foreign to the intention of the engraver. Great ingenuity was often displayed in seeking and finding some analogy between the supposed significance of the design and the fancied power of the stone itself. Taking the agate as an illustration, Camillo Leonardo says that in many different varieties had as many different virtues, and he finds in this an explanation of a multiplicity of images engraved on the various kinds of agate, without realizing that the true reason was that this material lent itself more readily to artistic treatment than did many others. The idea that some special design should be engraved upon a given stone became quite general in the early centuries of our era. The emerald, for instance, according to Demigron, was to be engraved with a scarab, beneath which was to be a standing figure of Isis. The gem, when completed, was to be pierced longitudinally and worn in a brooch. The fortunate owner of this talisman was then to adorn himself and the members of his family, and a consecration having to be pronounced, he was assured that he would see the glory of the stone granted it by God. Possibly, this may have meant that the stone would become luminous. A list of these symbolic designs is said to have been given in the Book of Wings by Raleigh, one of the curious treatises composed about the 13th century under the influence of Hebrew and Greco-Roman tradition. Although it owes its origin to the Hebrew Book of Razel, it bears little, if any, likeness to that work, as will be seen in the following items. The fact that the design is on an appropriate stone is always insisted upon. The beautiful and terrible figure of a dragon. If this is found on a ruby or any other stone of similar nature and virtue, it has the power to augment the goods of this world and make the wearer joyous and healthy. The figure of a falcon, if on a topaz, helps to acquire the goodwill of kings, princes, and magnates. The image of an astrolabe, if on a sapphire, has the power to increase the wealth and enable the wearer to predict the future. The well-formed image of a lion, if engraved on a garnet, will protect and preserve honors and health, cures the wearer from all disease, brings him honors, and guards him from all peril in traveling. An ass, if represented on a chrysolite, will give power to will give power to prognosticate and predict the future. The figure of a ram or a bearded man on a sapphire has the power to cure and preserve from many infirmities, as well as free from poison and from all demons. This is a royal image. It confers dignities and honors and exalts the wearer. A frog, engraved on a barrel, will have the power to reconcile enemies and produce friendship where was discord. A camel's head or two goats among myrtles, if on an onyx, has the power to convoke, assemble, and constrain demons. If any wears it, he will see terrible visions in sleep. A vulture, if on a chrysolite, has the power to constrain demons and winds. It controls demons and prevents them from coming together in the place where the gem may be. It also guards against their importunities. The demons obey the wearer. A bat, represented on a heliotrope or bloodstone, gives the wearer power over demons and helps incantations. A griffin, imaged on a crystal, produces abundance of milk. A man, richly dressed with a beautiful object in his hand, engraved on a carnelian, checks the flow of blood and confers honors. A lion or an archer on a jasper gives help against poison and cures from fever. A man in armor with a bow and arrow on an iris stone protects from evil both the wearer and the place where it may be. A man with a sword in his hand on a carnelian preserves the place where it may be from lightning and tempest, guards the wearer from vices and enchantments. A bull engraved on a praise is said to give it aid against evil spells and procure the favor of magistrates. A hoopoe with a tarragon herb before it, represented on a barrel, confers the power to invoke water spirits and to converse with them, as well as to call up mighty dead and obtain answers to questions addressed to them. A swallow on a Eleonite established and preserved peace and concord among men. A man with his right hand raised aloft, if engraved on a chalcedony, gives success in lawsuits, renders the wearer healthy, gives him safety in his travels, and preserves him from all evil chances. The name of God on a Siraunia stone have the power to preserve the place where the stone may be from tempest. They also give the wearer victory over his enemies. A bear, if engraved on an amethyst, has the virtue of putting demons to flight and defends and preserves the wearer from drunkenness. You hear that, people? We got a new alcohol cure. If you get too drunk, you need to get a bear carved out of an amethyst, and it'll keep you from getting too drunk. A man in armor, graven on a magnet or lodestone, has the power to aid in incantations and makes the wearer victorious in war. An Italian manuscript dating from the 14th century gives the following talismanic gems. If thou findest a stone on which is graven or figured a man with a goat's head, whoever wears this stone with God's help will have great riches and the love of all men and animals. If a stone be found on which is graven or figured an armed man or a draped figure of a virgin, bonded with the laurel and having a laurel branch in her hand, this stone is sacred and frees the wearer from all changes and heaps of fortune and haps of fortune. When thou findest a stone on which is graven the figure of a man holding a scythe in his hand, A stone like this imparts strength and power to the wearer. Every day adds to his strength, courage, and boldness. Hold dear that stone on which thou should find figured or cut the moon or sun, or both together, for it makes wearer chaste and guards him from lust. A jewel to be prized is the stone on which is graven or figured a man with wings, having beneath his feet a serpent whose head he holds in his hands. A stone of this kind gives a wearer by God's help abundant wealth of knowledge, as well as good health and favor. Shouldest thou find a stone on which is the figure of a man holding in his right hand a palm branch, this stone with God's help renders the wearer victorious in disputes and battles and brings him the favor of the great. Finding the stone called jasper bearing graven or figured a huntsman, a dog, or a stag, the wearer with God's help will have the power to heal one possessed of a devil and who is insane. A good stone is that one of which thou shalt find graven or figured a serpent with a raven on its tail. Whoever wears this stone will enjoy high station and be much honored. It also protects from ill effects of the heat. The original meaning of the swastika emblem has been variously explained as a symbol of fire, of the four cardinal points of water, of lightning, etc. Still, another explanation is given by Hieronymus, who inclines to the belief that it is simply a conventional representation of the human form, the lower shaft being the two legs joined together, two horizontal shafts, the outstretched arms, and the upper shaft of the trunk of the body. The four projections would stand for the feet, the two hands, and the head. The Egyptian crush ansata, the hieroglyphic symbol for life, and the Phoenician tan symbol, the mark that was to be stamped upon the foreheads of the faithful in Jerusalem, and in which in early Christian art was frequently substituted for an unusual cross, are both explained by the Hieronymus in a similar way, and he noted the facts that the swastika symbol does not appear in Egyptian or Phoenician art, drawing a reference that all three symbols originated in the same form or figure. To all these symbols were attributed talismanic virtues, and they were frequently engraved on precious stones. The so-called Monogrammic Cross was very freely used in work of the 5th century. This was simply a modification of the monogram formed of the first two letters of the name of Christ as written in Greek, a device which first appeared after the time of Constantine the Great, 337 AD. This monogram, usually the following form, P, with an asterisk below it, and the monogrammic cross, was made by changing the position of the Greek X, chi, and marking one of its arms, served as a straight stroke of the P, R, in parentheses, thus giving the following form, a P with a cross coming off of the tail. A curious amulet to avert the spell of the evil eye is an engraved sard showing an eye in the center, around which which are grouped the attributes of the divinities presiding over the days of the week. Sunday, the dies solis stag. Sunday, the dies solis is represented. Doing it again. Sunday, the dies solis is represented by a lion. Monday, the dies lunae, by a stag. Tuesday, the dies martinis, by a scorpion. Wednesday, the dies Mercury, by a dog. Thursday, the dies Jovis, by a thunderbolt. And Friday, the dies Venus, by a snake. And Saturday, the dies Saturni, by an owl. In this way, the wearer was protected at all times from the evil influence. Because of its particular markings, some of which suggested the form of an eye, malachite was worn in some parts of Italy, e.g. in Betonia, as an amulet to protect the wearer from the spell of the evil eye. Such stones were called peacock stones, from their resemblance in color and markings to the peacock's tail. The form of these malachite amulets is usually triangular, and they were mounted in silver. It is curious to note, as a proof of the persistence of superstition, that in each Rukan tomb at Chuisi, there was found a triangular perforated piece of glass, each angle terminating in an eye formed of glass of various colors. On many of the amulets fabricated in Italy for protection against the dreaded Jetatura, or spell of the ancient times, to assure the protection of the sun god, and his crowning was regarded as an inarticulate hymn of the praise to his deity. As an inarticulate hymn of the praise to his deity. He was also a type of dauntless courage. All of this contributed to make him a defender of the weak, especially of women and children, against the wiles of the spirits of darkness. Rostad, in his Chancellor had engraved this conception, endowed the cock with the proud conviction that it is his I'm sorry, I'm being distracted. Had enlarged this conception and endowed the cock with the proud conviction that it is his matutinal chant alone that the world owes the daily recurrent phenomenon of sunrise. Protect the weak, especially of women and children, against the wiles of the spirit of darkness. Rostad, in his Chancellor, Chanticleer. I feel like it's supposed to be like Chancellor or something, and there's two letters rearranged. But I mean, it's so old that I just whatever. Had enlarged this conception and endowed the cock with a proud conviction that it is to his maternal chant alone that the world owes the daily recurrent phenomenon of the sunrise. So the sun rises because the cock crows. In Palestine, the evil eye is supposed to be baleful of the gift of men who have light eyes, but more especially if they are beardless, just shaved. Possibly this is the power in which some of our blood and beardless mashers repose their trust. As an antidote to the awful influence of these blue-eyed monsters, the Syrian women decorated themselves with blue beads on the principle Similia Simalbus Curacanter. A woman that beautiful hair will tie a blue ribbon about it, or wear a blue bead in it, so as to ward off any evil spell by the blue eyes that might rob her of her fair dower. It is a well-known fact that many amulets were made in forms, suggesting objects offensive to our senses, suggesting objects offensive to our sense of propriety. These were thought to protect the wearer by denoting the contempt they felt for evil spirits leagued against them. Some such fancy may have induced the particular design of certain of the jewels alleged to have been pawned in Paris by the ex-Sultan Abdul Hamid for the sum of 1.2 million francs, $240,000. According to the rumor, these pledges must be sold, as the Sultan had failed to redeem them, but the designs are so risque that they cannot be offered at public sales. Therefore, the stones and pearls are to be removed, and the gold settings are to be melted and sold as metal. It is not exclusively characteristic of our commercial and industrial age that the price paid for a work of art should influence the popular estimation of the merits of the work, as appears in an anecdote related by Pliny on emeralds, upon which was engraved a figure of Amymon on the Dianade, having been offered for sale in the Isle of Cyprus at the price of 6 golden denarii. Ismenes, a flute player, gave orders to purchase it. A flute player gave orders to purchase it. The dealer, however, reduced the price and returned 2 denarii, upon which Isaemenes remarked, "By Hercules, he had done me but a bad turn in this, for the merit of the stone has been greatly impaired by this reduction in price." The variant of this design, directed by Demigron to be placed on an emerald, is recommended in the 13th century manuscript, where we read that to fit this stone for use as a talisman, it should be engraved with the form of a scarab, beneath which should appear a crested paraquet. According to the same manuscript, a jasper should bear the figure of Mars fully armed, or else that of a virgin wearing a flowing robe and bearing a laurel branch. It should then be consecrated with a perpetual consecration. The mythical author Sethel asserts that the owner of a jasper engraved with the sacred symbol of the cross would be preserved from drowning. A curious quid pro quo appears in the 15th century treatise of a gem written in French. Here, in a list of engraved gems suitable for use as an amulet, we read, "If you find a dromedary engraved on the stone with the hair flowing over its shoulders, this stone will bring peace and concord between man and wife." The original Latin text read, "If you find Andromeda on a stone with the hair flowing over her shoulders," etc. The translator, I read her name wrong first time, I read it right the second time. The translator's art, which could turn Andromeda into a dromedary, almost quelled that of the enchantress Circe. A few, even of the early writers, were disposed to be skeptical as to the virtues ascribed to these engraved gems, and did not hesitate to assert that the Greek and Roman engravers executed their design for ornamental purposes rather than to fit the gem for use as a talisman. This was undoubtedly true in a large number of cases, but nevertheless, as we have seen, many engraved talismans were really cut in the early centuries, as the art of the gem engraving was not practiced in the Middle Ages. Some medieval writers suppose that the engraving talismanic gems concurrent in their time were not works of art, but of nature, and Concord von Megenberg accepted this view, gave it as his opinion that the god granted these stones their beauty and virtue for the help and the comfort of the human race, adding that when he hoped to receive help from them, he in no wise denied the grace of God. Demigron writes of the Sard that if worn by a woman, it is a good fortune stone. It should be engraved with a design showing a great vine and ivy intertwined. A celebrated topaz was the note by George Agricola as being in the possession of a Napolitan Hadrianus Gelullius. It bore, in ancient Roman characters, the terse and pregnant inscription. Yep, it says pregnant. Nature deficit, fortuna mutar, dies homine curnit. This was freely rendered by Thomas Nichols as follows. Nature, by frailty, doth daily waste away. Fortune is turned and changed every day. In all there is an eye, knows no decay. Jah sees for eye. Jah, I think, is God. At least to hippies it is. There is in the Internal Academy at Moscow a turquoise 2 inches in diameter, inscribed with a text from the Quran in the letters of gold. This turquoise was formerly worn by the Shah of Persia as an amulet, and it was valued at 5,000 rubles by the jeweler from whose hands it came. It is well known that Napoleon III was inclined to be superstitious, and there is not therefore anything inherently improbable in the report that he left the seal he wore on his watch chain to his son. Unfortunate Prince Imperial as a talisman, this seal is said to have borne an inscription in Arabic characters signifying the slave Abraham relying on the merciful one, God. The talisman lost its virtue on that unlucky day when far off Zululand The heir to so many hopes was cut off in the first flush of early manhood. Well, that's going to be the end of my reading today. I'm going to go over to the other screen so I can see if there's anybody here, if they've said anything, or if maybe my whole stream has been screwed up and I didn't know it. Because I think Margaret would have probably called me, unless she's super busy. There she is. And I got Raw Dog Pendants is here or was. Scott Lambright is here or was. Good morning, everybody. I've got a super cute kitty rolling all over my feet. Well, oh, I didn't realize the computer's like in the way. Although, you don't need to see my dirty dishes. I didn't get the dishes yet. I'll do it like that. That's sort of cool. I never thought to use that. That's a neat idea. Okay, so it makes it look way more. There, I like that better. Anyways, how you guys doing this morning? Let's see, how long have we been going? Only an hour and 25 minutes. Well, that's okay. It doesn't have to be 2 hours every day. And I don't really like stopping in the middle of chapters. I really would like to finish a chapter. So, if I read one chapter and it's only an hour, I might continue. But I really hate getting trapped in the middle of a chapter and then becoming starving or having to go to the bathroom or something like that. I know this is a live stream, and on a lot of live streams, people do that. But this is also sort of, I'm going for that whole educational live stream thing so that there's a reason to watch this stuff in the future. You're so stinking cutely annoying, Felix. He's been down on my feet, rolling over, sleeping, grabbing my ankle with his paws and nuzzling his head on my foot. Cat's freaking adorable. Anyways. Thank you, Khaled. I really appreciate that. Comments like that do mean a lot. Thank you, Margaret. Margaret is my teammate on this. She is the one that she's always here and she's always helping me. And we talk on the phone and stuff. She's a homie. Anyways, today went pretty well. I stuttered way less. I got tripped up way less. And I really sort of accepted the fact that there's some things I'm not going to be able to pronounce right. I'm going to phonetically try them. And I'm just going to sort of gloss on and keep on going. And, as I keep doing this sort of stuff, I will get better at it. I'll get better at saying names I don't know and stuff like that. I am really happy with the way it's been going so far because it has been an escalation in people that are watching the videos after they're produced. This is an odd time of the day. I am in the late morning when most people are out trying to make $1. And that's what this video is partially about, making $1 too. It's also about getting that engagement back up. And I am going to be offering a whole bunch of, we're going to be doing some rock auctions coming up real soon. They're going to be in the earlier parts of the days on the weekends because I plan on playing poker in the later parts of the days and evenings a lot of the day. I really need to go and start spending like 40-hour a day weeks out there. I think I can make this a reality and it can get me where I want really fast. I've always wanted a ring. I've always wanted a bracelet, and those are specifically about the World Series. I've always wanted a World Series ring. I've always wanted a World Series bracelet. It doesn't mean anything to anybody else but me. But anywho, no picture on my main screen. There should be. I can see a picture. You really can't see anything, but you can hear me? Oh, I scrolled up. That's old. Margaret says this was perfect timing. Awesome. I'm glad it was perfect timing. And one of the great things about this, I didn't realize my stupid thing. I didn't blank the eye out. One of the things I really enjoy about the Restream is that when I live stream in any other platform except for Restream, it takes hour or two for me to be able to do anything to the video. And for some reason with Restream, it's available the moment I finish restreaming. It's there in YouTube. I can edit things. I can put the monetization on the commercials and stuff like that. But like, again, I don't ask this very much in many of my videos to smash that like button and to share. But when they are videos of educational value and you think there's anybody that might be interested, please share them. Put them in groups, in Facebook groups. And Facebook groups generally need to be more opening to outside sources. We need to get this sort of whole symbiotic highway flow of rockhound information going everywhere, and then everybody can benefit from it. With the way groups are running right now, they're sort of very in their own little fishbowl, and so they're really sort of stuck in their own little fishbowl. I know, I figured that out, Margaret. I figured I scrolled back up. That was all me. So, anyways, I am going to be, I have to get that, see if I can get that lawnmower running and mow my lawn outside because it's horrible. I also have to do every single one of my dishes. I mean, every one. I rinsed everything, but everything is dirty. I gotta go. It's gonna be like an hour of doing dishes. And I need to clean up my general area. I have to do this on a weekly basis, or else it gets so bad that it takes me 3 or 4 days to clean it up, because I don't know what happened to me in my old age, but now I'll take everything out of a fucking room in order to clean a room, because I'll keep seeing stuff and it'll drive me crazy. I know what it is. Fire agate did this to me. That beautiful stone right there, that it's sort of shady, but that beautiful stone right there, that's what did it to me. Cutting this stuff made me see all of the kinds of stuff I didn't used to see, and it's made me neurotic about some stuff. And like, if you're going to go this far, you might as well go a little bit farther and do a better job. And now that's what I do. So anywho, I love y'all for being here. I'm going to try and get some short videos posted, and I might do another live stream later, maybe even playing some poker, maybe even polishing some fire agate stones, because I have a lot of fire agate I really need to finish polishing that I think is ready. And I have a bunch of other stuff I need to cut. I really, really do. That needs to be a priority. But anyways, talking about really, really do, I really, really love you for looking at this video. I do. I mean, it's sort of selfish to act like I don't love you for being you, but let's be honest. I am selfish. And I only love you because you're watching this right now and you give a fuck. Because if you didn't give a fuck, I probably wouldn't either. That's the truth. It's that mutual caring thing that gets us on the respect factor. Anyways, I love y'all for being here. Thanks for checking this out. Come back and see part 4, because we're not done yet. We're not done for a good long time. I love you for watching. Thanks for being here, and I'll